10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let us see where we are now. Okay, so this is now the Saturday afternoon, second session. And now we come to the what's called the Compendium of Objects. This is a pretty tough section. Lock the doors. Yeah, sorry. Whoops! I shouldn't have spoken my own thoughts. But since we have to get the bases in also, so I won't deal with this as in intricate detail. Okay, so now this is section 16, page 135. Okay, so I'll read the text. In the Compendium of Objects, there are 6 kinds of objects, namely visible form object, sound object, smell object, taste object, tangible object, and mental object. So if we just sort of stick to the sutta style of exposition, this is sufficient. But now the Abhidhamma goes into greater detail. Well, first it says visible form itself is the visible form object. Similarly, sound is the sound object, and so forth. But the mental object is 6-fold. These are objects that can be cognized only by the mind, not by the physical senses. So this includes what's called sensitive matter, subtle matter, consciousness, that's citta, the mental factors, these are the chaitasikas, nibbana, which is the ultimate or the world transcending reality, and concepts, everything that's conceptual in nature. Okay, now each of the 5 physical sense objects, form, sound, smells, and so on, can also be cognized by the mind apart from the senses, or the mind by a mind consciousness apart from the sense consciousness. But the 6 types of mental object can only be cognized by the mind, not by the senses themselves. So these include the sensitive matter. That's the kind of matter that I spoke about, which is identical with the 5 sense doors. That's on page 136, we have the explanation of these mental objects. So the sensitive matter is the sensory receptive substance in the 5 sense doors. So this is the eye sensitivity, ear sensitivity, nose, tongue, and body sensitivity. Then there's something called subtle matter. This is 16 types of material phenomena, which will be elaborated later in the chapter on material phenomena, chapter 6, which we come to at the end of this program. Then citta, or mind or consciousness, can become an object of the mind. But this is an important point. that from the Abhidhamma standpoint, one citta cannot cognize itself at the same time that it's occurring. So when we look into our state of mind, from the normal perspective, we say, I know what's happening in my mind now. I have a bad thought, so I say, I recognize that bad thought. I have a good thought, I recognize that good thought. And it seems, because our mind is working sort of at the normal level, sort of undeveloped level, it seems that we are aware of our own state of mind exactly as it's happening. But from the Abhidhammic standpoint, because the cittas are occurring so quickly, what we're actually aware of is the state of mind maybe a split second ago. So if I get angry, then I look, somebody says, you're angry, look at your own mind. I look at my mind, I see, wow, there's angry thoughts arising in my mind. But actually, at the exact micro moment that I'm looking at the angry mind, the mind that is doing the looking isn't the mind with the anger. The mind with the anger was just a split second ago. That is why, when we're doing mindfulness meditation, when, say, anger arises, if we just keep on looking at the mind and noting anger, 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 what happens after a few seconds, at least for some people, after a few seconds, that the anger, not for everybody, the anger starts to become weaker, 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 until it dissipates and there's just the looking mind, the observing mind. And so it says that it should be noted that a citta in its immediacy cannot become its own object. For the cognizer, that is the knowing mind, cannot cognize itself exactly at the same moment that it's occurring, but rather a citta in an individual mental continuum can experience earlier cittas in that same continuum, and also with some meditative development, the mind can know the thoughts in other people. In that case, the mind is cognizing the citta of other people. Okay, then the chaitasikas can also become objects of a mind or process. For example, when one becomes aware of one's own feelings, one's volitions, one's emotions. And then nibbana becomes the object of cittas occurring in the mental process of noble individuals, that is both trainees, that stream enterers, once returners, non-returners, and as well as arahats. And then concepts, which fall into the class of conventional realities, also belong to the category of mental objects. Okay, then we come to section 17. Okay, this is classifying the objects by way of the doors. Okay, for all types of I-door consciousness, visible form alone is the object. And that pertains only to the present. Likewise, in the case of sound, likewise in the case of ear door consciousness, all of the cittas occurring in the ear door take sound as their object. So if we look on page 131, the guide to number 13, So those 46 types of citas that arise in the I door, 5-door adverting, I consciousness, receiving, investigating, determining, the sense sphere jhavanas, registration. In an I door process, they're all taking visible form as their object. If it's an ear door process, some sound is impinging on the ear, then all of the citas that arise in that ear door process are taking the sound as their object. Similarly with the other sense doors. In the case of the mind door consciousness, the object can be any of the 5 physical sense objects, as well as all types of mental objects. That is, a mind or consciousness can take any sense object as its object. For example, okay, I'm looking at this carton. So the eye door process is what's taking in the blue color. But now when I judge this to be blue, that is actually done by a mind door process. It's a mind door process that understands this is blue. And I see here a dark blue, a medium blue, a light blue. And when I compare the different shades of blue, that is being done by the mind door process, taking visible form as its object. Similarly, if you're listening to, say, a piece of music, you have different notes. What is that? My singing is not that bad. Right. So, isn't it? Stephen, you're a professional musician. What? Wow, okay. Anyway, at least one person recognized it. And at least, well, many people looked at me with puzzlement. But now, what is hearing, each individual note is the ear consciousness, but what joins them together into a melody, with quotation marks around it, would be the mind consciousness building upon the activities of the ear consciousness. Who gives singing lessons? Okay, and then to show how this happens again, okay, when I look at this, yeah, you have the same thing on your side. So I'm looking at the lettering here, and what takes in the lettering initially is eye consciousness, because the letters are visible form. But what puts the letters together into a word is mind consciousness. So I recognize pure coconut water. Or if you get like a cup of tea, you taste it. This is oolong tea. This is what's it called? Tea Kuan Yin tea. Yeah. This is Ceylon tea. So, you distinguish. You use the tongue consciousness, but this is done. The discrimination, the recognition is done by mind consciousness. Okay, but now coming back to the text, so the mind door process can cognize any of the 5 physical sense objects, as well as all types of mental objects inaccessible to the sense door process. And then the mind door chittas can cognize an object belonging to any of the 3 periods of time. I can cognize things seen in the past. Of course, I can cognize anything occurring in the present, and I can cognize, this is a little puzzling to me, the future, because it seems that when I'm thinking of the future, I'm always imagining what's going to happen in the future. So it seems to me that is conceptual, but I don't know how to resolve that problem. Okay, and then one can cognize things which are said to be independent of time, things not pertaining to time, and this applies to nibbana and to concepts. And okay, nibbana is timeless because it is by its own nature, it's without any arising, without change, without passing away. And then concepts are said to be timeless because they are devoid of intrinsic nature. That sounds a little puzzling. The way I would understand this is that a concept let's say, always remains the same in that, I don't know, it's a little puzzling, no? Okay, let us say I have a concept of a horse. Okay, so the concept of a horse would be the same whether horses were living in 500 BC, 500 of the Common Era, 1,000, horses in the 1950s, horses today, horses in the future. Of course, maybe horses evolve biologically and change, but the concept of a horse, it seems, remains the same. I'm not going to defend this. It's a little puzzling to me. Yeah, maybe we could say like the concept of a triangle certainly remains the same. You know, whether it's, was it Pythagoras in ancient Greece? Who was the one, Euclid, who worked out the geometry? For him, the triangle was the same. When I went to high school and learned geometry, the concept of the triangle was the same. Okay, shouldn't lose time on this. But this is what's very interesting and very important, and that is on page 138, where we have the bold heading, in the case of the door-freed consciousness. This is the consciousness, or the citta, that performs the 3 functions of rebirth linking, bhavanga, and death. And this can be of 19 types. We've mentioned these earlier. And the object of this citta can be of 6 kinds. It can be any of the 5 sense objects, either past or present. It can be a mental object. In all 3 of its functions, that is, rebirth, bhavanga, death, this citta retains the same object from the rebirth moment to the moment of death. That same object is grasped at the moment of rebirth by the relinking consciousness, and during the course of life, whenever the bhavanga citta is occurring, the bhavanga citta is taking that same object as its own object. And at the very moment of death, the death consciousness has that as its object. Now, how is that object determined? What's going to be the object of the rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness? So we continue here. It says, the object of the door-freed consciousness, this is like the rebirth and bhavanga consciousness, is generally identical with the object of the last cognitive process in the immediately preceding existence. So when a person is on the verge of death, in that very last phase of active consciousness, some object will present itself to the cognitive process. The object is determined partly by previous karma or the actions of a person, partly by the present circumstances. And now there are three types of entities that can function as the object of this last active cognitive process. One is a karma. That means some deed that we have performed in the course of our life, some good deed or some bad deed, will come up in the last cognitive process. That becomes the object of the last cognitive process. And when that last cognitive process is over, then there takes place the death consciousness. Then when the rebirth consciousness arises, its object will be that karma from the life that has just ended. So that deed that we have done sort of repeats itself at the mind door, and that deed becomes a sort of image of that deed, of us doing that deed, then becomes the object of the rebirth and bhavanga consciousness right through to the death consciousness of the next existence. That's one possibility. The other possibility, number two, is called a sign of karma. Karma nimitta in Pali. This is an object or image associated with the good or bad deed that's going to determine rebirth, or some instrument that was used to perform it. And we have some examples here. For example, a devout person, devoted Buddhists, say, will see maybe a saintly Buddhist monk, or the image of a chaitya, a dagaba, a stupa, or he might see a Buddha image. A Christian, a virtuous Christian who's dying might see the image of the cross, or the image of Virgin Mary, or maybe the image of a church, the altar of a church. A physician may see image of patients, or an image of him examining, well, that would be the karma. He might see the image of a stethoscope, or other instruments that a doctor uses. And a butcher might hear the groans of slaughtered cattle, or see an image of a butcher knife. So you could use your imagination to fill in all of the bad images that somebody might see. An alcoholic might see an image of a bottle of whiskey. A gambler might see an image of dice. A person gangster might see an image of a gun, or you might see images of people that he shot dying. Okay, so that is the sign of karma. And then the last one is called the sign of destiny. And this is a symbol of the realm into which the dying person is about to be reborn. So sometimes when a person is dying, the image of the realm towards which they're heading comes into the field of consciousness. So if the person is heading for a heavenly rebirth, then they might see celestial mansions, or they might see devas, deities hovering around, or they might hear celestial music. Well, okay, and so a person who's heading for an animal rebirth might see, here they give fields or forests or fields, but the person might also see a pigsty or the image of cattle and some cattle with a corral. And a person who's heading for rebirth in hell might see the infernal fires or might see demonic beings saying, welcome, welcome, come. We have a delightful celebration for you here. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to pass over the rest of the very detailed, intricate discussion of the objects and go to the bases. So this is on page 144 of the English book, and this is section number 20. Now, the bases seem to be similar to the doors, but there is a difference between them, as we'll see. Okay, first I'll read the text, then we'll explain. Okay, in the summary of bases, there are 6 bases, namely eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the heart base. All these are found in the sense sphere world, but in the fine material world, 3 bases, nose, tongue, and body, are not found. In the immaterial world, no base exists. Okay, now what is the base? Okay, in those realms in which matter exists, that is the sense sphere realm and the fine material realm, the mind and mental factors always occur on the basis of some physical organ. And that physical organ, in dependence on which they occur, is called a base. So here in the guide to number 20, it says, a base is a physical support for the occurrence of consciousness. So now the first 5 bases coincide with the first 5 doors. That is, the bases, first 5 bases, and the first 5 doors are the sensitive matter of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the physical body. But the base is not identical with the door, because it plays a different role in the origination of consciousness. A door is a channel or an opening, a gate, through which the chittas and chaitasikas of a cognitive process gain access to the object, while a base is a physical support for the occurrence of chittas and chaitasikas. Okay, an important consequence of this, in an I-door process, many types of chittas apart from the I consciousness occur through the I as their door. We saw that 46 kinds of chittas can occur through the I door, including the Javana chittas. But I sensitivity is the base solely for I consciousness, not for the other chittas that come through the I door. And similarly with regard to the ear door, so the ear door is the channel for many other types of chittas to occur, taking sound as the object, and the door as the ear as the door for those chittas to meet the sound as the object. But only ear consciousness occurs with the ear as its base. The two kinds of ear consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant. And now the sixth base that's mentioned in the Abhidhamma is called Hadayavatu, which means literally the heart base. Now in the suttas, the Buddha doesn't mention any base for the occurrence of mind consciousness. In the canonical Abhidhamma, what is said is that certain types of mind and mind consciousness occur with a particular type of rupa, particular type of material organ as their basis. But it doesn't specify what that organ is. But in the commentaries, they identify this organ for non-sensory types of consciousness with what's called the heart base, which they say doesn't mean the actual physical heart. It's not the organ which is beating 75 to 80 times a minute, but rather it's said to be a subtle kind of matter in the region of the heart. And so based upon this heart base, in realms in which there is matter, physical matter, the other types of consciousness apart from sensory consciousness arise. And this brings up the question that your name was like Joan? Okay, that Joan brought up earlier today, or this afternoon. Now in modern biology, physiology, they take the base of consciousness to be the brain. What's interesting is that the suttas don't say anything about the brain. The commentaries think of the brain as being the area in which mucus is stored. No, it's true. If you look in the Visuddhimagga. So it seems that the function of the brain was maybe not really understood until 19th century in Europe. And so the ancient Indian commentators, maybe this is true about the Chinese philosophers too, locate the base of consciousness as what they call the heart area. And I support that. maybe this is why I dropped out of biology in college, but so you could always explain it that way. I could compare it to a computer. Okay, in a computer, what does all of the higher functions in the computer is the CPU, the central processing unit, but the power for the computer doesn't come from the computer itself. Well, it'll come from the battery if you use a battery, but usually we plug it in and the power is coming from some other place. So the way I see it, the brain is like the CPU, like the central processing unit. I was going to say cognitive processing unit. So the brain is like the central processing unit, but the base of consciousness itself I see to be somewhere around the heart. I think if one really pays close attention to one's experience in meditation, one feels sometimes that, especially if one is doing the Brahma Viharas, the immeasurable qualities meditation, one feels like those, really gets a physical sense that those qualities of loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, that they're coming someplace from this area. Of course, when we study Abhidhamma and have to figure out how many cheetahs arise through this door or that door, you get a headache, you don't get a...
There's more connections from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart. So
Excuse me?
There's more connection from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart.
Yeah.
So the heart has central dictate in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely correct in that.
Okay, that's good. Did you get an A in biology?
Yes.
Are you a medical doctor?
No.
Biologist?
I'm a sort of a kind of a read a lot of neuroscience.
Oh, okay.
I'm sort of a
Okay, so if the brain is damaged, this will come to your question, then higher forms of cognition can't occur, but probably we would say that the bhavanga is still flowing on the basis of the heart base, and maybe other simple types of cognition are occurring based on the heart base. That's what my conjecture would be. Okay, let us continue, and of course we're coming to the end of the session. Okay, now in the sense sphere realm of existence, the sensory plane of existence, we have 6 bases. But in the fine material realm, the grosser types of sense experience do not occur. That is, smelling, tasting, and touch sensations. It's said that the beings in the fine material realm can see and can hear. So they have 3 bases. They have the eye base, the ear base, and the heart base. And then in the formless or immaterial realm, there's no matter at all, no material substance. And so in those realms, there's no base, but consciousness occurs without a base. Don't ask me what consciousness is like in those realms, but the texts say that consciousness occurs there without a base. Okay, now we come to the classification by way of consciousness. This is section number 21. So it said the 5 elements of sense consciousness, that's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousness, occur entirely dependent on the 5 sensitive parts of the sense organs as their respective bases. So since their sense consciousnesses can be unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant, so when 5 senses, so we have 10 types of consciousness arise based on the 5 sensitivities. The mind element, that's the 5-door adverting consciousness, and the 2 types of receiving consciousness occur in dependence on the heart base, and also all of the remaining, that's the mind consciousness element, including the investigating consciousness, the great resultants, the 2 chittas with aversion, the first path consciousness, smiling consciousness, fine material sphere consciousness occur in dependence on the heart base. So that's 33. The remaining classes of consciousness, whether wholesome, unwholesome, functional, or supramundane, may be either dependent on the heart base or independent of it. That is, these types of consciousness, when they occur in the sense sphere realm or in the fine material realm, they occur in dependence on the heart base. When they occur in the non-material realm, they are not dependent on the heart base. And then the immaterial sphere resultants, that is the rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness of the beings up in the immaterial realm. Those resultants are not dependent on the heart base. They're independent of the heart base, because those types of consciousness occur only in that realm, and there's no matter in that realm. So they can't depend upon the heart base. Okay, then if we turn over, we have the guide to number 21. You see a table which illustrates this visually, graphically. So you see that 2 types of eye consciousness occur. Wait, this is something else. No, I'll pass over that. I think what we look at is the Compendium of Basis. This is table 3.8. It's the big table. So you see, eye consciousness occurs on the eye base, ear consciousness on the ear base, nose consciousness on the nose base, tongue, body consciousness, each on their bases. Then the mind element, the mind element is 5-door adverting, and the 2 types of receiving consciousness occurs based on the heart base. Then the investigating consciousness, smiling consciousness, sense sphere resultants, the fine material sphere consciousnesses, always based on the heart, the immaterial sphere wholesome consciousness, as we develop it, that is when one develops the immaterial meditative attainments in the human world, they'll occur based on the heart. And the immaterial sphere functional consciousness, that is as developed by when an arahat develops the immaterial meditations, it'll be based on the heart base. And then the supramundane types of consciousness, except for the path of stream entry, occurs sometimes based on the heart. Actually, I've shifted over. But I'm actually gotten mixed up a little bit. But why don't I let you look at this table at your leisure? I think I gave enough information, so based on that information, you'll be able to decipher the table. Because it's 4:20 and we should stop now. Don't think he didn't give any time for questions, because we have this evening, I believe it's an hour and 15 minutes to grill me and drill me with all of the most difficult questions you could think of, but maybe have a little compassion and don't ask too many difficult questions. So we have now a meditation period. Maybe you just take 5 minutes to sort of walk around a little bit, just because you've been sitting for an hour. So walk around a little in 5 minutes, 4:25, we'll start the meditation.